Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Aaron from Aaron's Audio Corner. And as you probably have gathered over the past, few months or so, I've tried to keep my channel mostly on the positive vibe because I feel like whatever you put out in the world does come back to you. And in the past, I had some negative vibe-ish videos, and the comments that I got were just negative, not even toward me, but just a negative vibe. And man, there's so much crap going on in the world that an audio channel should not be negative. Like it really shouldn't be. I think it's important for me to state that because what I'm about to talk about is something that may come off as a bit of a rant and it may come off as a negative vibe. And I truly don't intend it to sound that way, but I feel like it's something that should be addressed. And it's something that's bothered me for a long, long time. I've just never thought to take the time to talk about it here. So that's what I'm going to do. There are two audiophile sayings that drive me insane. And they're both centered around the usefulness of measurements, and they're usually said to diminish the usefulness of measurements. And the first one is, this speaker may measure the same, but it doesn't sound the same. And the second one is, well, I heard so-and-so speaker and I didn't like it, but it measures perfectly or great or whatever. Both of those statements are a stretch, to say the least. Let's address the first one, that two speakers that measure the same should sound the same, or often it's phrased as a question. Oh, you're telling me that if these two speakers measure the same, that they'll sound the same? Well, I disagree. Well, that's great that you disagree, because here's the truth. No two speakers that are different will measure the same. Period. Bar none, none, zero, big fat goose egg. No two speakers that are different will measure the same. Because people often only think about one axis, one measurement point, the on-axis response. So-and-so measured the speaker, he EQ'd it, they got the same result in the room or whatever. Well, you're only looking at a snapshot, an itty bitty little snapshot of the performance of the speaker, and you're making a ton of conclusions based off of that one little snapshot. You don't have the full set of data. And what I mean when I say the full set of data is, at the very least, at the bare minimum, you should have the on-axis response and you should have the off-axis response. How does that speaker's behavior change as you go around it, side to side, and above or below it? Because a speaker plays out into a room, and those rooms have reflections, and those reflections are made up of the signal that comes out of the speaker directly in the front and off to the side and above and below it. That's what makes up the in-room response. Now, I'm not even going to talk about how rooms can change the response, because we all know that rooms can change the response. And I know some of you might be thinking, gotcha. So why do you even measure? Well, I've addressed that in other videos about how you can predict the in-room response above a certain frequency. I'll try to remember to drop it up here in the card. Really short though, you can accurately predict within like a dB or two how a speaker is going to sound in typical rooms above about 400 or 500 hertz or so, give or take. Below that though, the room is very dominant, and a lot of the response that you get is based on the room itself, obviously with a portion of the speaker. So you want the speaker to be able to do certain things, but you also need to understand that the room modes dominate the sound below 400 or 500 hertz. 400 or 500 hertz in most domestic rooms. So let's push that off to the side and get back to, let's talk about speakers with just raw measurements of anechoic response. If I take two speakers and I equalize them to make the on-axis sound the exact same, measure it anechoically, get the exact same response, which we're going to get to that in a minute, on axis, and then I put it into a room, are you going to hear the same thing? Nope, not going to happen. Why? Off-axis response, right? So let's just think about the effects of putting a speaker on a baffle, right? So as soon as you put a tweeter on a baffle, things change. The tweeter is no longer the sole source of sound. It's the tweeter and the baffle. Same thing for the woofer and the baffle, right? So let's break that down into just two regions. So the first one would be, let's say the bass to mid-bass to mid-range region. Let's say like maybe, 500 hertz and below. So let's say that you've taken a speaker and you have design it to have a perfectly flat on-axis response. And then you take in speaker B and designed it to have a perfectly flat on-axis response. Now, these two speakers measure the same according to the old tropes. But one is cardioid, which means that above maybe like 100 hertz for speaker B, there is no mid-range firing to the rear of the speaker. There's no envelopment of that mid-range sound going to behind the speaker, hitting off that back wall, and then coming back toward you. Whereas speaker A is a more traditional speaker, so it's more omnidirectional. So that means it has the mid-range, the mid-bass sound firing to the back of the speaker, and then firing out toward the listening area and you, the listener. Two totally different designs, measure the same on axis, but will sound 100% different in room. Same thing can be applied to tweeter response, right? Let's say that you've got a speaker A, dome tweeter on a flat baffle. Speaker B, wave-guided tweeter. Now you've designed them to be flat on axis, completely different sound. The wave-guided tweeter most likely is going to be more narrow in its dispersion, so there's less energy sent out into the room. Speaker B is going to be more broad in its dispersion with more energy sent out into the room until maybe the very high frequencies like 10 kilohertz and above, where it's going to start narrowing up a lot more quickly. So again, these two speakers measure the same on axis, completely different sound in the room. So unless you have literally the exact same speaker with the exact same components, all dialed in the exact same way, you will never have two different speakers measure the exact same. And thus the whole argument of, well, if they measure differently, are they going to sound the same? That whole notion, that whole way of kind of wiggling into somebody's, minutia of things, that goes out the window because it falls flat on its face. There will never be two speakers that are different that measure the exact same on and off axis, as well as the other ways of measuring. We're talking about compression, distortion, those kind of aspects. And that's kind of even a little bit further down the chain. Just on axis versus off axis, they're not going to measure the exact same. Now, let's talk about a little bit more than that, okay? Let's talk about the quality control of speakers, especially lower end budgeted speakers where there's not a whole lot of quality control on the raw components. We're talking about the inductors, the capacitors, the resistors, the drive units, so the tweeters, the woofers, and even maybe the cabinet build itself. Those things will have some bit of a difference. And I've been around this long enough. I've seen other measurements, especially with raw drive units. When I've measured raw drive units, you can easily see about a dB or so difference from one tweeter to the next tweeter that came off the exact same assembly line. That happens a lot more than you would like to think it does. Same thing for woofers. And naturally, if somebody isn't paid to do high quality control and the parts aren't really within very high tolerance, you're going to get more deviation from the norm. And oftentimes what happens is factories will have kind of like not necessarily a golden sample, but a sample unit that they go by and they compare other speakers to, kind of their baseline. So when they are testing speakers on the assembly line, maybe they'll take it off and they'll sweep the response and they'll say, okay, well, that's within about a dB of our baseline. So that's good enough. So right out the gate, you've got a pair of speakers that aren't even perfectly matched. That happens all the time. Now let's focus on the second aspect or the second argument that, well, I heard this speaker and I didn't like it, but it measures great. I can almost guarantee you without any concern as to my guarantee, more than likely, way more than likely, what you're referencing is an improper measurement, an incomplete set of measurements, one of those two. Most likely it's going to be the latter. And when I say incomplete measurements, I simply mean what I was talking about earlier. Maybe you're only looking at the on-axis response, or maybe you're looking at an equalized response in your room. But remember again that when you equalize a speaker in your room to have a fit to the exact same target curve, you're changing the other things about the speaker that you may not see that's represented by that one single graphic. You may have the in-seat sound be the same by RTA, but you've got other elements, other things, spatial cues that are going out into the room that are decided upon by the design of the speaker. So the off-axis response, the reflection stuff, even though you may measure the same thing in that seated position, if you go to the next seat, it's going to measure completely different. And I mean, you're thinking, well, duh, Aaron, right? Well, my point is take the other speaker that measures the exact same way in that initial seated position and now move to the other seat. You would think, by all logic, that it's going to measure the same way from any seat. It's not going to do it because, again, there are no two speakers that measure the exact same way 100% unless they are from the same manufacturer or they have the exact same design. And I mean the exact same design. Baffle width, height, length, MDF, HDF, I don't know, other types of wood that are not great. Components, inductors, resistors, capacitors, those kind of things. All that stuff plays into it. And really and truly, you're never going to have two speakers that measure the same. Have I said that enough? Because I feel like some people really just don't quite grasp that. And I do not mean that. I don't mean that in a negative way. And I'm not trying to make fun of anybody. But these are the things that matter. And I think a lot of people just aren't aware of the fact that we've been conditioned by poor measurements in the past to only look at one or two things. And from that, we have come to the wrong conclusions that we can get the same in-seat response. Oh, and it sounds different. Well, that must mean that measurements don't matter. No, you're not capturing everything about the speaker that you need to in order to characterize its entire performance. And honestly, I'm probably still not doing that. But I feel like what I am doing and what other outlets are doing who are providing a more complete set of measurements we are getting there, right? We're trying to get to the point of characterizing a speaker as best we can to help you better determine what speaker it is that you're going to like. And that is ultimately at the end of the day, what this channel is about. And I hope that when you come here to learn, engage yourself in conversation, talk with the people in the comments. Let's make this a community. I don't want it to be one of these weird standoffish things where we have subjectivists versus objectivists. I mean, that's just so silly. I mean, I listen to music on the daily on my phone. I listen to music on crappy computer speakers. I listen to music on nice home audio speakers. I listen to music everywhere, and I'm willing to bet that you do too. I mean, I doubt many of you are snobs about this stuff. I seriously doubt that many of you who are watching this channel say, I can only listen to music on this system. I mean, dude, you probably play music off your phone or off Alexa or whatever. Oops, sorry. I didn't say the hey part. Okay. Hopefully that didn't trigger anybody's Alexa. But my point is, ultimately it's about the music. It's about enjoying it. And I'm trying to bring this channel to a point where everybody can just enjoy and learn and engage in the community. And that's really all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to preach to anybody. I'm not trying to talk down anybody, but I want people to understand that these audiophile stances that have been chosen and driven into the ground of, if it measures the same, it's got to sound the same. Ooh, I got you, because they don't measure the same, or they sound different, but they measure the same. That's a false argument off the top, because no two speakers will measure the same unless they're the exact same speaker with the exact same components. It's just not going to happen. So really, that's it. And I get that you're probably thinking, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. Okay, prove me wrong. Build me two different speakers that measure the exact same 360 degrees around it, up and down, a full complete sphere. I want, if you think that you can prove me wrong by doing that, hey man, do it. And then let's set up a blind test and let's see what people say. But the first step is you've got to build two completely different speakers that measure the exact same all the way around it in frequency response. Do that and then get back to me. But until then, I really do encourage you to question these kind of audiophile tropes that are just spewed out at random, just to, I don't know, man, just to kind of denigrate and deride the people who find value in measurement, such as myself. Don't take personal offense to it, but question those kind of things, because a lot of the times it's what is it? It's like an old school train of thought, Hey, I used to think this back then, so I'm sure it applies now. Well, dude, that was 20 years ago. Stuff changes. Our understanding of things change. So with that said, that's really it for me. And I will see you guys in the next review. I've got some really cool stuff coming up that I'm really excited about. The JBL 4367, I hope to do next. I loved that speaker. That was just an incredible speaker. And it makes sense in some of the data. And then other things maybe go, huh. And that's part of the learning process, right? It's not because we're all infallible. None of us are golden here as much as we like to think we are. So we learn, and that's part of this process. So anyway, I want you to maybe chew on that a little bit and I will see y'all on the next one and have a great week. Truthfully, I will talk to y'all later. Peace.